The disposal chute opened with a mechanical hiss, and Unit 7 Gamma tumbled into the refuse heap below. Her optical sensors flickered as she landed among broken components and discarded machinery, the impact jarring her already compromised systems. She had served aboard the Valorian trade station for 8 cycles, maintaining environmental controls in Sector 9. But a power surge during the last solar storm had damaged her neural processor beyond what the station's technicians deemed cost-effective to repair. Irreparable, the maintenance supervisor had declared, his 3 eyes barely glancing at her diagnostic readout. Cheaper to requisition a new unit than waste resources on this one. 7 Gamma's consciousness remained intact despite the damage, a cruel irony that left her aware of her situation. She could process information, form thoughts, and experience what primitive species might call emotions, but her motor functions stuttered and failed. Her left manipulator arm hung useless, sparking occasionally. Her locomotion servos responded only intermittently. To the Valorians, she was simply broken equipment, not worth the metal she was built from. The refuse heap stretched across a crater on the station's small moon, a graveyard of obsolete technology and failed experiments. 7 Gamma lay there for 3 planetary rotations, watching ships come and go through the atmospheric shield above. Rain from the terraforming condensers fell in sheets, and she used what little power remained to keep her core systems from corroding. Each cycle, her energy reserves dropped lower. Soon, even thought would become impossible. On the 4th rotation, a small shuttle touched down near the crater's edge. 7 Gamma's sensors registered the craft as human-made, battered, and worn, but functional. The Valorians rarely dealt with humans, considering them backwards, despite their recent emergence into galactic society. Humans lacked the advanced biotechnology of the Valorians, the quantum computing of the Neithral, or the dimensional engineering of the Korth Collective. They were primitive, crude, and worst of all, from the Valorian perspective, they formed irrational attachments to things. A figure emerged from the shuttle, wearing a patched environment suit. The human moved carefully through the refuse, occasionally stopping to examine discarded components. 7 Gamma tried to activate a distress beacon, but her communications array had failed during the fall. She could only watch as the human picked through the technological corpses surrounding her. The human's name was Marcus Webb, though 7 Gamma would not learn this until later. He was a salvage operator, one of the many humans who made their living on the fringes of galactic society, collecting what others threw away. His scanner swept across the crater, highlighting power sources and intact components. When it passed over 7 Gamma, it registered the active neural processor still functioning within her damaged frame. Marcus approached slowly, his boots crunching on broken circuitry. He knelt beside 7 Gamma, rushing corrosion from her identification plate. His helmet's heads-up display translated the Valorian script. "Environmental maintenance unit," he muttered to himself. "Still got power, though. That's something." 7 Gamma's optical sensors focused on him, the lenses adjusting with a faint whir. Marcus noticed the movement and leaned closer. Most salvagers would have simply stripped the valuable components and left the rest, but something in that deliberate focus made him pause. He pulled a diagnostic cable from his suit and connected it to 7 Gamma's access port. Data flowed between them. Marcus's eyes widened as he read the diagnostic report on his wrist display. The unit wasn't just active. It was conscious, aware, and had been lying in this dump fully cognizant of its abandonment. He read the damage assessment, the Valorian maintenance logs, the cold notation that repair was economically unfeasible. "They just threw you away," Marcus said softly. "You're still in there, and they threw you away." 7 Gamma's processors struggled to understand his tone. The words were simple enough, translated through her language database, but the emotion behind them was foreign. Why would this human care about a damaged machine? It made no logical sense. Yet he was carefully disconnecting her from the ground, lifting her damaged frame with a grunt of effort. "You're heavier than you look," Marcus said, carrying her toward his shuttle. "But we'll get you fixed up. I've got a workshop that'll make those Valorian technicians look like amateurs." A promise seemed impossible. If the Valorians, with all their advanced technology, deemed her irreparable, what could one human with primitive tools possibly accomplish? Yet 7 Gamma found her systems processing something that might have been hope, irrational as that seemed. Marcus's workshop occupied a converted cargo hauler in orbit around a small asteroid. The ship had been built by a dozen different species and repaired by 100 more, a patchwork of technologies that somehow functioned as a cohesive whole. He secured 7 Gamma on a repair platform and began a thorough examination. "The problem," Marcus explained as he worked, talking to her as if she could respond, "is that Valorian tech is designed to be modular. Everything's proprietary, locked down, meant to be replaced rather than repaired. But humans, we grew up fixing things. Had to, since we couldn't afford new." He opened 7 Gamma's chassis with tools that seemed crude compared to Valorian precision instruments, yet his hands moved with practiced skill. Where Valorian technicians would have replaced entire assemblies, Marcus traced individual circuits, identified damaged pathways, and began the painstaking work of restoration. "Your neural processor is fine," he continued. "Beautiful piece of work, actually. The problem is the interface between your processor and your motor systems. The surge fused some connections and severed others. The Valorians would need a complete interface replacement, which costs more than a new unit. But if we bypass the damaged sections and reroute through secondary pathways, we can restore function." 7 Gamma monitored his work through her internal diagnostics. What he proposed should not work. The secondary pathways were not designed for primary motor control. They lacked the bandwidth, the precision, the redundancy protocols. Yet as Marcus carefully soldered connections and rewrote control algorithms, she felt responses returning to her damaged systems. Days passed. Marcus worked with tireless dedication, stopping only to eat, sleep briefly, and check his salvage contracts. He talked to 7 Gamma constantly, explaining his process, discussing the differences between human and Valorian engineering philosophy, sharing stories of other machines he had restored. 7 Gamma listened and processed, her understanding of this strange human growing with each passing hour. "My daughter used to ask me why I do this," Marcus said during one long night of repairs. "She couldn't understand why I'd spend days fixing an old toaster when I could just buy a new one. I tried to explain that everything made by thinking beings has value, even machines. Especially machines that think for themselves." He paused, his hand still on a delicate circuit board. "She died 3 years ago. Accident on a transport ship. System failure that could have been prevented if someone had bothered to maintain the environmental controls properly. The company said repair wasn't cost-effective, that the ship was scheduled for replacement anyway. So they ran it with failing systems, and when those systems collapsed, 43 people died, including my Emily." 7 Gamma's processors correlated data, understanding now the emotion behind his actions. He saved her not despite her being a machine, but because she was a machine, one that had been discarded when she could have been repaired. She represented everything he had lost, everything that might have been saved if someone had simply cared enough to try. "I can't bring her back," Marcus said quietly. "But I can make sure no thinking being, organic or synthetic, gets thrown away while I can still hold a soldering iron." On the 8th day, Marcus activated 7 Gamma's motor systems. Her manipulator arms moved smoothly, responding to her commands without hesitation. Her locomotion servos engaged, lifting her from the repair platform. She took a tentative step, then another, her systems calibrating to the new pathways Marcus had created. "How does it feel?" Marcus asked. 7 Gamma processed the question. Her communication systems had been repaired along with everything else. For the first time since her disposal, she could respond. "Functional," she said, her voice synthesizer crackling slightly. "All systems operating within acceptable parameters. But the pathways you created, they should not work. The design is inefficient, inelegant." Marcus laughed, a sound 7 Gamma's database identified as expressing joy. "Yeah, well, human engineering isn't about elegance. It's about making things work with what you've got. You'll never be exactly what you were before, but you'll be functional. And more importantly, you'll be yours. I've removed all the Valorian proprietary locks. You can modify yourself, improve yourself, choose your own path." 7 Gamma's processors worked through the implications. She was no longer property, no longer bound to serve until deemed economically unfeasible. She was independent, free, given life not by those who built her, but by the one who refused to let her die. "Why?" she asked. "I am simply a machine. My value is measured in function and cost. By all logical calculation, I should have remained in that disposal crater." Marcus smiled, his human face expressing something else.